I got obsessed with Star Wars. I am Denis Villeneuve, filmmaker, and these are my film first for BAFTA. It's a tricky question. What is the first film I've ever seen? Of course, coming from a small village, the first images that I vividly remember, but still it's going from very far away, were not in a theater. It was in a television. And I remember, and probably because my mother insisted so much on the importance of the moment, it was a moment where the astronauts were walking on the moon. I remember watching with my brother in our pajamas, the man walking on the moon. That is my oldest memory of an image. And I was super young and it was probably not the first step because I would have been too young, maybe one of the other missions, frankly. But what I recall is my mother's side of it, saying that she thought we were looking at it like if it was a regular cartoon. Therefore, we didn't, I was so young, maybe I was 3 years or something, I didn't understand the importance of it. And for her, it was science fiction that her kids were watching it as it was like, the guys are on the moon. One of the first films I've seen at a young age that I should not have seen is probably the beginning of 2001, A Space Odyssey. In a way, it's one of the best gifts I ever had because the trauma of seeing the opening sequence with the ape still today give me shivers. I was too young to understand what was happening on screen. It's again on television. And I remember that there's a moment where I was invited to go to bed, and I watched the rest of part of the movie, looking between the stairs, watching the TV from the side, being absolutely in awe, and not understanding what I was watching. This sequence where we see the beginning of the dawn of man was one of the most frightening things I had seen in my life at the time, and still today, by the way. I remember one day looking at the newspaper at home and seeing an ad for a film. And it was the first time, it's the first time in my life, I was probably 10 years old, that I said to my parents, I want to see that film. I want to go in the theater seeing that film. And it was Star Wars. And it was the first time that I was requesting the desire to see something that it felt compelled to see. I got obsessed with Star Wars. I was a target audience. I was 10 years old. And at the time, there was no VCR, there was no, the movies were not coming on TV before years, so I saw the movie a couple of times on the big screen. And then I had to wait the 2 longest years of my life to have the chance to watch Empire Strikes Back. And I remember I was living in a small town, in a small village, and the next town was maybe 20 miles, and we were traveling, taking our bicycles, and with my friends, and I was 12 something, and my mother allowed us to go by bicycle and go to the theater to watch Empire Strikes Back. The owner of the theater was really moved that we did all this ride. We had to go back and forth, on those tiny bikes. So it allowed us to. It were allowing us to watch the movie twice in a row. So I watched Empire Strikes Back like that maybe 12 times in theater, going bicycle, going back and forth. When I saw Empire Strikes Back the first time in theater, I remember still today, first of all, the trauma of Luke losing his hand was an image that I was not prepared to see, and that was extremely violent. And for a kid, after that, after the physical torture, having the psychological torture to understand that the evil was his father, and that removed all the air out of my lungs. I mean, I was like floored. I was obsessed by the design, the visual approach, the drama of it. That, I think, was one of the moments that the birth of the idea that cinema is the most powerful way to tell a story. That's what I was saying. My friends and I, when I was early at high school, we were going to at noon there was a program, a little theater at school where a teacher was showing short films from the National Film Board of Canada, animated short films, and one of them one of the animator, Co-Odman, director, was doing those beautiful little masterpieces with stop motion film. And we went to a seminar where Co-Odman showed us how he was making films. So I did. My first film was stop motion, where I had cut out tiny figures in foam and trying to have kind of a conflict between tiny characters. Yeah, it was like a kind of a stop motion movie. It was happening in the desert, actually, with a strange character trying to compete for one substance, strange substance, that was made out of glass pieces, something. Very bad movie, but still, yeah. I remember as a early age that exactly they were the movies that I loved had specific names at the end credits. People that were directing those movies, people that had vision to bring those worlds to the screen. There was George Lucas, but there was also Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg. I was really into American directors, Ridley Scott, British, but it was like I was into science fiction. I was obsessed with science fiction directors that were working with science fiction. And at the time, there was no internet, so it was about fanzine, where you were buying those magazine at the store, and every month we were running at the beginning of the month to get sure that we will have the chance to have one copy of those magazines that will explain to us how the movie were made, how the movie were designed, how the vision of the directors, and etc. So it's like at the beginning of my teenage years that I started to dream about becoming a director. I was obsessed with the idea of bringing Dune to the screen for a long time. When I read the book in my teens, I thought that there was the opportunity there to make a tremendous, powerful film. But of course, I was like small town in Canada, in the snow. It was very far away from me. It was just a dream. But as the year progressed and as I got closer and closer to Hollywood, to finally work in Hollywood, people kept asking me in Los Angeles, what will be your ideal project? What will be your biggest dream? Dune kept coming back in my mind, and there was a moment where I felt that I was ready after having done Blade Runner 2049. I felt that I had necessary muscles I had built the muscles to be able to bring that to the screen, and I learned that Mary Parent at Legendary had got the rights, and we got in contact together, and it was the fastest meeting of my life. I wanted to make Dune, she wanted me to make Dune, so that was about it. And I remember getting out of Legendary's office and calling my wife Tanya and saying we're going in the desert. Filming in the desert is exhilarating. I absolutely love the desert. I love the contact with the infinity. With the desert is an ecosystem that is a representation of death, but there's a tremendous amount of life in the desert. There's like all the living forms that can endure the desert are a genius way of survival, and it's a very inspiring landscape. That what I love about it is that you are in contact with infinity, but in the same time it brings you back to your humanity and your real place in the world, how infinitely small we are, and it's a very meditative experience to be in the desert. There's no sound, you just hear your heartbeat, and it's very introspective. So this contrast between infinity and the introspection really inspires me.